Ayo Tsutsaimu, Ayo Tsutsaimu. Yes, that's right. Burmese for Achtung, Achtung.
That's my favourite already.
Not everyone appreciated my Haitian Creole rendition at the start of a recent show, but we're right back on core topic today. James, how are you? James Holland, of course, ladies and gentlemen, historian extraordinaire. We're in my kitchen, where all the good battles are fought.
It's a fine kitchen as well.
Thank you, James. Now, Burma, of course. Big subject, because one of the things we've been doing lately is we've been kind of looking at what was going on 75 years ago. So particularly we built our Arnhem week in a bit around the event 75 years ago. So what was happening 75 years ago in Burma?
Well, this time, so where are we now? We're now in October, aren't we?
You're the end of the fighting season, aren't you? Because like it or not, I mean, it's the case in Western Europe. There's a fighting season that by this time of the year, by October, things are slowing down. The nights are getting longer. The weather's getting much worse. You pass the equinox. That must be the same in the Far East as well.
Yeah, funny enough, I mean, we're just emerging out of the monsoon season. So monsoon season in Burma, northeast India rather, is kind of sort of May to November time, something like that.
Right.
So we're just kind of emerging out of that. And of course, in the case of 14th Army, which General as he was at that point, Slim, is commander of, they've had their huge success at the Battle of Imphal. Which has just crushed the Japanese 15th Army,
yep.
And they're now moving back into Burma. So the whole point was, Slim's point of the Battle of Imphal was to not just defend northeast India, it was to absolutely crush.
Bring to battle and destroy the Japanese army.
Bring the battle and destroy the Japanese army. And he does that very successfully. It leads to the Road of Bones, which was the title of Fergal Keen's book about Kohima. Yeah. And that's because as they retreated, they were starving, they were already ill, and they just were left where they died as they poured back into Burma. And so Slim, although he hasn't got express authority to reconquer or retake Burma, he is moving in. Yeah. And he's angling for the kind of next big offensive, which is going to come in the spring of 1945, and that is going to be the kind of victory in Burma, and that's Mike Tila and Mandalay and all those great victories and stuff. So not an awful lot is happening in October 1944, but an awful lot was happening, or certainly cerebrally was happening in October 1943, so 76 years ago. Yeah. And I'm very conscious that in the podcast so far, we haven't done an awful lot about, I've sort of mentioned Guadalcanal and so on, but we should definitely do a bit more about the war in the Far East.
Yeah.
And that period of October 1943 is really, really interesting because this is when Slim is acting commander of Eastern Army, as it is then.
Yeah.
And it's not till the 22nd of October that Mountbatten turns up at Slim's temporary headquarters in Barrackpore, which is a suburb north of Calcutta. And Mountbatten has just become Supreme Allied Commander, Southeast Asia Commander, SEAC.
Yeah.
And first thing he's done is gone to see Chiang Kai-shek in China. And then he's on his way back to Delhi. He's called in at Barrackpore to see Slim. And he has a long chat, and they talk about all the things that have, not gone right for the Eastern Army, which are Legion.
Which is everything.
Let's just recap. They've been kicked out of Burma.
Yeah. They blow up the Sitang Bridge before they get half the army across it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a catalogue of chaos and disaster. And even the attempt, because we've had our first Chindit expedition by this point.
Yeah, that's spring of 1943.
Even that, I mean,
bit of a shout.
It's heroic and all that, but it
doesn't achieve a lot.
It's a shit show. I think that we are definitely at my house. That's the plumber upstairs. I've got a problem with one of the toilets.
My point is that Slim had a bit more problem on his hands than just a faulty toilet, to be honest. Out in Bengal as it then was. And what's happened is they've then tried to reconquer, go into the Arakan, which is now Rakhine State. That's where all the Rohingyas are having their terrible time of it at the moment. So that is northwest Burma, south of what is now Bangladesh, what was then Bengal.
And you've had second Arakan as well, by
so that's the second Arakan offensive, and that's the first Arakan offensive in the sort of late winter, early part of 1943, when General Noel Irwin is in charge of Eastern Army, and it's an absolute shower.
It's a day bomb.
And what he does is he comes up against Japanese defensive positions which have been dug into the hills around Mungdor and Bufidang, and which are sort of key villages, stroke towns in that part of the Arakan. And he just keeps chucking one after another infantry battalions at this. It just gets absolutely nowhere. Then he tries to blame everybody else but himself. Tries to put all the blame on Slim, even though Slim's only come in right at the very end and the most part has been there as an observer. And actually gets his comeuppance, gets fired. And in that firing, Slim is made temporary acting commander of Eastern Army, and everything's sort of on hold because it's the summer, it's the monsoon, it's absolutely hoofing it down with rain. No, the Japanese aren't interested in fighting. British have retired back into southern Bengal to lick their wounds, and so there is this time to actually just take stock.
But you also haven't at this point, the autumn of 43, you haven't quite had the training shakedown about jungle fighting yet. That's about to happen, it's happening. The Jungle Book hasn't quite been written yet, or hasn't gone down all the way through, and so morale isn't. The way of joining up the fighting and everyone having the same doctrine. So there hasn't been the doctrinal shakedown that had to happen, because basically up till this point, you've got this idea that the Japanese are better at fighting in the jungle. I mean, they are. But it's because they've figured out how to do it rather than basically conceptually get this idea coming through that the jungle's neutral, the jungle's as difficult for both sides to deal with as the other, and what you've got to do is rethink actually how you fight the Japanese, not the jungle.
Yeah,
and you take the jungle into account. It's the thing they've not done so far, and there's been this thing of trying to fight on roadblocks and the Japanese circumventing the roadblocks, and then when the Japanese are dug in, it's how you actually deal with that and how you deal with the environment you're in and all that sort of thing, which just hasn't happened yet, has it?
No.
Organisationally, and you've still got that old British Army and Indian Army thing of the trainings left basically to each divisional commander, and because after all, he may be in Malta next year, he may be in Norway the next. He doesn't know, so there's no point in him training anyone or having a doctrine.
So this is where Noel Owen has gone completely wrong, because basically he's treating the Arakan offensive like he's in Normandy, or France,
North Africa.
Or Flanders,
a lot of people come from North Africa.
So he's treating it as what we would call symmetrical warfare, whereas what needs to be done is asymmetrical warfare. And actually, Alexander, who has been helicoptered in effectively, obviously no helicopters at that point, but you know what I mean. He has sort of been flown in to take command of the retreat of the Burma Corps out of the British out of Burma.
Yeah.
And Slim has been pulled out of Iraq, and he's been in East Africa to start off with, then Iraq. He's been pulled out of that to help take command of the Burma Corps.
Yep.
So Alexander and Slim are working together in 1942 in the retreat out of Burma. And at the end of that campaign, having got the British safely back across the Irrawaddy, Alexander is then pulled out and becomes Commander-in-Chief of the Middle East and goes to Cairo. But he writes his dispatch and writes his report. And one of the things he says, what we've got to sort out is air power. And what you've got to realise is you've just got to hold your ground. The Japanese, they win, and they're doing well by travelling lightly and capturing and then feeding off what they capture. Yeah. If you can deny them that, you're going to be fine. That is a message that isn't passed down to Noel Irwin, but it's something that Slim absolutely gets. And what Slim recognises in this, as the rain is hoofing down on Barrackpore, and Barrackpore is this ancient, I mean, the house he is in is the original sort of vice-regal lodge for India before New Delhi becomes the new capital of the Raj. So it's a very, very grand building. It's surrounded by this incredibly impoverished suburbs of northern Calcutta. It's right on the banks of the Hooghly River. It's incredibly hot. It's incredibly steamy. It's a beautiful, beautiful sort of Palladian building with sort of marble floors and all the rest of it, just as you can just picture it. But it's sort of stultifying because you're not near the front. You're stuck in this sort of suburb. This is not the place to be a general. And as the rain is hoofing down, and Slim is there, he sort of thinks, okay, this just whole thing needs a massive, massive rethink. And first of all, he starts to go, okay, so what are the problems here? And you're absolutely right. Training is one of the 4 big problems that he identifies. And he says, every cook, every truck driver has to be trained exactly the same way. It's no good just the infantry battalions. Everyone has to be able to do this. And part of that jungle training, as you absolutely point out, is making sure that the jungle is not your enemy, it's your friend.
Yeah.
It's learning camouflage techniques. It's recognizing that actually there is no such thing as a front line as such. That you can use this to your advantage. You can get behind the Japanese. You can surround them. You can move through with stealth. You might find it terrifying. We'll turn it on its back, make it terrifying for the Japanese.
Yeah.
So he does that very effectively. So that's one of the things one of the ills that he recognizes that needs to be sorted out PDQ. The second one is just the huge logistics involved. I mean, the front is 1,000 miles. It's incredibly difficult to get to. I mean, if you think it's sort of hard moving around Italy in the winter of 1943-44 like Spike Milligan is doing, try going up to kind of northeast India and the Burmese border. I mean, it's an absolute horror story. And there's just no metal roads. There's no means of making asphalt roads or anything like that. So what do? You've got 500,000 men in the army, all need feeding. There's 30 different ration scales.
Yeah.
Because there's Rajputs, there's Nepalese, there's, Marathis, there's Scousers, there's jocks, there's guys from Essex, literally there's Kentish men and men of Kent, etc., etc. They all need different food. So you've got to sort all that out. And how do you logistically get that? On top of that, in 1943, there was a Bengal famine, which kills,
a couple of million
people. And part of the reasons for that is because power has been devolved to a number of the Indian states, and they're refusing to kind of bail out Bengal with supplies, so supplies are not really getting through. It's obviously a sort of gargantuan human tragedy, but from Slim's point of view, it also isn't helping him either. So you've got that logistics. So one of the things he does is, for example, he gets Chinese people in to come and rear ducks in the Imphal plain. They put over something like 168,000 acres to agriculture and farming and vegetable plots to feed the army up on the Imphal front, which is kind of, 800 miles from where they are in Calcutta. Then he gets a whole load of guys, workers from tea plantations, to build a brick road down from Chittagong down to the Arakan front, because there is no road. And so he sort of solves those kind of problems bit by bit. He gets a guy called Alf Snelling, who was his sort of adjutant quartermaster general in Iraq, and who's an incredibly competent person. And he goes, "Okay, I just need you to solve my logistical problems," and he does do that. So one of them is logistics, one of them is training. The third problem is illness. Yeah. So in 1943, for every single battle casualty, there are 120 to illness.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's not just malaria; it's dengue fever, it's typhus, it's dysentery.
Yes, I remember reading a stat for the following year, for October of 44, of something like there being 600 battle casualties, but 250,000 people with malaria.
Correct. And one of the problems is,
Which
of course,
is just what?
Yeah, no,
Sorry?
it's insane.
I can't get my head around that.
81% of the army per year are getting malaria.
Yeah, amazing. And that's a disease you have. That's a disease that you can relapse on any time.
Anytime.
That they haven't got modern medicines like Malarone that we have now, and the thing that does stop the parasite.
Well, it's just started to come in. It's been called Mepicrine.
Yeah.
So that is just starting to come in. So what the other thing he recognises is that they're all having a completely shit time. Yeah. They're losing. It's the jungle. It's miserable. It's hot. They're getting ill. No one wants to be there. No one's interested in fighting sort of mad Japanese who want to sort of crucify them against trees and use them as bayonet practice. Yeah. Can't really blame them. So they're saying, "Great, I've got malaria. Let's go to Calcutta then for 3 months." And he thinks, actually, no, forget that. What we'll do is we'll put up these malaria forward treatment units, and we'll set them up, and they'll be just a couple of miles behind the line, and we'll send all our doctors forward, and 10 days on a bed, and they're usually okay again. He went back to the front, and we'll make sure they all have Mepicrine, and and I will sack a junior subaltern if on a spot check any one of his men in his platoon hasn't taken his Mepicrine. Yeah. And it works.
He malaria himself, Slim. He did, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
He did in 44,
and he got worse than that.
He had a rule, didn't you? You weren't allowed to have a bath or a shower after dark. That was one of his malaria rules.
And you weren't allowed to have his sleeves down.
Yeah, that's right. And he broke his own rule and got malaria.
That's right. Yeah. Then the fourth ill he identifies is one of morale. Yeah. And he thinks it's spiritual and intellectual. And this needs to be turned around. Spiritually, they need to feel that what they're doing is there is a cause for this. Yeah. The Imperial Japanese are an ill, a bit like the Nazis, that has to be crushed. intellectually, they need to feel that they're being supported.
Yeah.
Materially, they need to feel they're being supported. And that they need to feel that actually they can, that the Japanese is not a Superman.
But these are all completely, these all tie together perfectly, don't they? Because
course they do. Yeah.
If you know your training's good, and if you know you can survive in the jungle, and if you know that you're going to be looked after if you get ill, and if you know that there's discipline about taking care of yourself and all that sort of thing, it shows the army cares about you.
Yes.
And it shows you're not just an anonymous cog in an enormous faceless machine. It actually is trying to save your life, and there's a good reason to save your life, because there's an enemy that needs dealing with. It takes us. These things all. We talked about Jonathan Fennell's book a long time ago.
Yeah.
These things are all part of that jigsaw. Is that you can't work on morale unless you've worked on training, unless you've worked on health,
Yes.
unless you've worked on supply, unless you've fixed the food supply, unless your officers are all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were. None of those. You can't have all four things without. They're mutually reliant on each other, and create something that's bigger than greater than the sum of its parts, as it were.
Absolutely. So the interesting thing about so what happens is Mountbatten turns up on the 22nd of October, 1943, calls in at Barrackpore, and they have a chat about this, and Sim goes, well, no, it hasn't been going terribly well, and this is what I think needs to be done. And Mountbatten basically goes, I like you. I want you to be my army commander. And Sim goes, well, don't you think you need to kind of consult with Gifford, who's the army group commander, because it also includes Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. And Mountbatten goes, no, I'm Supreme Allied Commander, I do what I like. No one tells me what to do. I'm Supreme Allied Commander. That's what Supreme Allied Commander means. I want you to be my army commander. And Sim goes, well, I'm flattered, sir. That'd be great, but I think you might need to check that with the powers that be. And again, he just goes, absolutely no way, Jose. I've made up my mind. You're my man. And he's absolutely spot on. It's one of the best things that Mountbatten does. He's absolutely just intuitively gets it.
On his Second World War track record, that is the best thing he's done. But
yes, because we should talk about the Dieppe raid another time.
Dieppe, and how many ships has he had sunk under him?
Yeah, and also he was very incredibly loose-tongued.
Yeah.
So he was sort of absolutely notorious for kind of spilling the beans on everything. But anyway, that appointment is made, and Slim says one of the conditions he says is, I want your absolute support on everything I do. We need to go and talk to the troops. There's a morale component. We need to go out and then get there talking to people. I want you to back my appointments, and I also want to change the name. Eastern Army. Those were the bad old days. This has got to have a new name. Yep. New. From now on, we only move forward. This is a bit like sort of Monty and Alex before Arnhem. And he goes, yeah, fine. He goes, so they call it 14th Army, and that's how 14th Army is born. And to cut a long story short, it works spectacularly well.
Rebrand.
It's a total rebranding. Yeah. It's no longer Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's KFC.
Right. Well, time for a short break. But don't worry. Now, Charmy Chammy. That's back soon to you and me. Well, welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk.
Yeah, and we've got a very good question here from Andy B, which, Al, I think you're going to like, actually.
Okay.
Excellent podcast, gents. Thank you very much. And long may it continue.
Yes.
Well, here. My question is, what are your thoughts on Operation Varsity taking place only 7 months after Operation Market Garden? #We Have Ways. So, Al, Varsity.
Well, Varsity.
What is it?
Varsity,
when did it happen?
March 24th. It's
1945.
1945. The airborne component of Operation Plunder, which is the British Second Army Group with an American army as well. I can never remember which one. Ninth. That's right.
General Simpson.
Crossing the Rhine at Wesel, which was a place they thought about doing Market actually at, and Comet. They looked at Comet and then Market again.
One of the names of underlines just how little they've gone.
Yeah, how far they haven't gone.
Yeah.
But my immediate gut reaction to this question is only 7 months. I've asked you only 7 months after Market Garden. Is something I think is quite interesting. Is we with the glorious benefit of hindsight can say that Market Garden was I think we came to the conclusion worth a punt, high risk but worth a punt. You can see if you try and take off your hindsight goggles why they did it, what led them to do it. You can see where it went wrong and all that sort of stuff. What's quite clear is only 7 months after Operation Market Garden, it was quite clear that Allied planners thought airborne operations are absolutely worth a go. We've got the gear, we've got the people. Let's just do them. And rather than being put off by the calamity of Market Garden. They're actually encouraged to say this is a workable way of doing things. I mean, it's a thing again we talked about with Market Garden is actually how close Market Garden is to success. You know, even with all the things that go wrong, it's within a gnat's kneecap of coming off, right? So you could look at what Varsity demonstrates is that you know the first Allied Airborne Army, Allied planners, Allied airborne people, and also the people who didn't understand how airborne operations work, which is Montgomery, Dempsey, the people down from there, and arguably Eisenhower as well, who after all gave Market Garden the thumbs up in the first place. They think, well, we'll brush ourselves down, we'll learn the lessons, and we'll do it again because we've got this in our toolbox. We'll jolly well use it.
And there are some lessons that are learned. First of all, they don't put them quite so far ahead of the advancing armies, and secondly, one lift. But the main lesson from Arnhem is the single lift, right? There's another division that they were going to use, a third airborne division they're going to use. They had one look. They thought we can't get them all in one go, so we won't bother with it. So it's 18th Airborne Corps, isn't it? Which is the Americans.
Yes, so the Americans have Ridgway, who had been 101st, is then moved up to having an American corps. So all the American airborne divisions are in a corps. So 17th, 82nd, 101st, and then I can never remember the fourth one.
12th, is it?
I think it's the 12th, who basically, they just are on the bench for the whole of the war. 17th have been raised in 43, spent a long time training in America, and were used for a lot of sort of experimental exercises and stuff, and weren't part of the sort of combat, the pointy bit of airborne. But after Market Garden, they're brought to Europe, and they're based in France, and they do Varsity out of France. So on a different air plan, completely different air plan, and different concept to what you've seen at Market, which is, you know, one of the problems with Market is how far it is from how far Arnhem is from England. So you've got much bigger turnaround times. That's why they can't do 2 lifts in a day. So the big lesson is, well, if we can only do 1 lift, we'll only use the 2 divisions, which is, you know, arguably, if you'd done that at Arnhem and thought, well, we can only use 1 lift, then your air landing brigade that you can send in on day 1 of Arnhem goes to the bridge rather than sits around Wolfhazer and Renkum,
waiting for protecting the next lot.
Guarding the drop zones for the next lots. Even having to move further away from the bridge to guard the Ginkelheide, like the King's Own Scots Border 7 Cosby had to do. So anyway, the really, really, really big lesson is 1 lift. And they do that. It's the biggest single lift of the war.
Airborne, British 6th Airborne.
British 6th
last
Airborne.
Seen over Normandy.
Well, no, last seen in the Bulge, actually.
Oh, yes,
the
of
line.
Course,
They were bussed into the Ardennes to help shorten the line and provide the shoulder for the German army to break on while the Americans sorted themselves out. So they've been used as kind of fire brigade, and the US 17th Airborne had also been sent into the line in the Bulge battle. So they've been reconfigured and they've got the replacements, and they're sent in 1 lift. So it's 16,000 people in 1 lift in 1 day. Biggest ever single first day airborne lift operation.
It's monstrous, isn't it?
It's gigantic. And you know, when people talk Market Garden being the biggest ever, up to that point, and then they do, you know, you do something even bigger, because after all, first day Market Garden, you aren't landing 3 divisions, you're landing components of 3 divisions. So actually, it works out as less people. But they're only over the other side of the Rhine. There's high ground above Wesel. And
there's this forest, isn't there?
Yes, there's forest. And I've been there. Have you been there yet?
No.
Right, brilliant. So it's forest, but it's forestry. It's not. So you've got these huge sort of football pitch-sized clearings in the forest that are rectangular. And the German guns...
That's where they are.
Are in the forest. And it's anti-aircraft guns and it's artillery, because after all, it's 88s. Which are doing both jobs, or all 3 jobs if you want. And so what's decided, the other great lesson of Arnhem is that, well, we'll land on the guns then. If there's flak where we're trying to get to, what we won't do is land 3 miles away and form up in a jolly battalion, and then
we'll just land right
on top of the guns. So
we're going to take some hits, but we know that.
So 8 para battalion are in. They go in first. And literally land in this clearing where there's guns on each corner of the clearing, and land on the guns and take the guns. Then the air landing people, their job is to take a series of railway crossings and bridges.
Bridges over the River Issel.
Yeah, the River Issel, and at Hamilton, there's a railway crossing, all sorts of stuff as well. And the big plan there, and we're about to run into lessons not learned from what they thought was a lesson learned from Arnhem, but actually wasn't. It's what we're about to run into. What they did there is Guy Chatterton, who was head of the glider pilot regiment, who'd flown Browning into Nijmegen in September, so had got out. So he was one of the glider pilots who got out of Market Garden.
Who's also in Sicily.
And so he's the glider guy. He says, well, we have to do coup de main. Worked in Normandy, we have to do coup de main. This is a perfect chance for us to do. We have to do coup de main operations to take these crossings and bridges and all that. We have to do it like we did in Normandy because that's the way this works, right?
So that means gliders.
Gliders that land right on top of the things that the men in the gliders are meant to capture. Now, the problem is here's your lesson not learned, is 1st Allied Airborne Army is still not talking to 2nd Army Group and 2nd Army's planners properly. Because there's a 5-day smoke screen at Wesel, right, that's pumped across the river so that the Germans can't see what's going on the other side of the river as the 1.5 million man operation with, and that's including its tail, forms up on the British side of the Rhine, and the 30,000 Germans the other side. Obviously,
17 divisions,
shit their pants, right? But the idea is a smoke cloud, and 6th Airborne don't know about this smoke cloud. That the glider planners haven't been told. That somehow along the way,
it's just been left.
It's just not been communicated to them. So you get these gliders releasing over. You get and obviously, and the thing we talked about in Market Garden, and it goes back to Sicily, is each year the transport air crews, they get better, and they too digest the lessons of the airborne operations they've been on, so the transport command people and the American transport people are better at delivering people to drop zones than they were the autumn before, and better than they were in the summer of 44, better than they were in the summer of 43. But if there's an enormous 5-day smoke screen,
you can't do much about it.
You can't do much about it. So the coup de mains in general don't come off because they can't see
what they're doing.
They can't see what they're doing. And it's because still someone has not got that communication worked out properly. So Varsity is simultaneously this great digestion of the lessons of Arnhem and all that, and also not in some very basic screw ups. But the big lesson, the big lesson learned is they're relieved within 24 hours.
Yep.
The Royal Marines it's commandos, Army commandos and Marine commandos, and then there's Royal Navy landing craft are brought to the Rhine to do the crossing. And you've got,
but it's successsul, isn't it? I mean, they capture all the bridges, they get the railway lines, and they land in the forest.
But a casualty rate not too far off Arnhem in terms of men killed.
It's about 1,000, isn't it?
About 1,000, and Arnhem's 1,600 killed. So not that far off it. I mean, the main difference is 6,500 people aren't taken prisoner like in Arnhem. So
the other thing is
700. 6 airborne land in this, and 1,500 people, 1,000 people are killed. That's pretty high. And then they go into the line, and then they go all the way to the Baltic.
Yeah, but as I understood it, the casualties are expected to be higher than they actually are.
Yeah.
And they do achieve all the things.
So
one of the criticisms about Plunder and Varsity is it's kind of
overkill.
It's overkill. It's way too big, and. Again, I think that's just being a little bit wise after the event. Now, there was this episode that the American historians always love to show, and the Monty haters always love to show, that General Simpson, who is spectacularly competent and completely forgotten now, he's the guy who captures the Ruhr in an envelopment, and it's a brilliant operation with his 9th Army. And he is really, really super competent. But he comes a couple of weeks before Varsity and Plunder and says to Monty, look, I reckon I can get across here at Erdingen, and I can get across here and I can do it really easily without having the whole weight of 21st Army Group behind it. What do you reckon? And Monty goes, absolutely no way. We're going to do it by the book. And this is sort of this is where all the criticism about the lack of kind of flair, methodical, all the rest of it. But let's not forget where we are. Let's not forget also the fact that for 21st Army Group, 2nd Army and the Canadians, the Reichswald, just to the east of Nijmegen, that General Gavin was so worried about when the 82nd Airborne dropped in on Market Garden, has been a bit like the Hurtgen Forest was for the Americans. It's been an absolute meat grinder. They haven't gone very far. It's taken them a hell of a long time to get through this. And it's all very well saying, yeah, we've heard that the Germans aren't, that well defended here and all the rest of it. You still got to get across the Rhine. That's a major, major obstacle.
Yeah.
Everything has, so much has shown them that the Germans still have got some fight in them. And I'm actually a proponent of the broad front strategy. I think it suits their operational modus operandi.
Yeah.
And I think it's the most sensible way to make sure that you don't have vast numbers of casualties. Because although the way the Allied armies are fighting is that there's actually the numbers at the front line and the actual tip of the spear are comparatively few, all through 1945, it's a total meat grinder for all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, the casualties are incredible. I mean, in April 1945, the Americans lose 10,500 men dead, in the front line. That is an entire... That's a division. That's a fighting force of a division killed in 1 month in April 1945. So if there's a bit of caution and you've got all this stuff, and don't forget, it's really, really important that Monty and the British are there in the final phase of the war. Political considerations do come into it.
Yeah.
I think going for plunder, going for Varsity is entirely justified. And the other thing is, yes, it was easy getting across the River Rhine, and I know the troops got across easily first. But had those guns not been neutralised, had the Germans blown up those bridges, then they'd have got stuck.
Yeah.
And you've got these airborne forces, you might as well use them. I don't think the criticisms are quite as valid.
But it also shows that Arnhem didn't deter anybody from using them. That airborne remains a viable weapon even after what is now seen as a sort of paradigmatic cock-up.
Yeah.
Is that actually this does work. We just need to apply it more sensibly. It's Varsity sort of comes as a kind of footnote. But if you were in 6th Airborne, it's no footnote. It's as a hair-raising an operation as anyone had ever done. It's that thing of with a high casualty rate. I mean, landing on guns, and back in the day, met a couple of people who were there. And their stories are as horrifying as anything out of Arnhem. You're actually landing on the German positions, the Germans reacting, and again, it's that thing of that those Germans in late March 1945, they weren't throwing in the towel, and they weren't getting ready to surrender. They were there to fight to the last round. A lot of them. So you've got that going on as much as anything else.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think it's entirely justified, personally. Mm-hmm. And I also think criticism of the American... Well, we can talk about this another time, but criticism of Hodges and all the rest of it. I really, really do think the broad front strategy is probably the correct one because of the way we've set ourselves up. Once
Market Garden hasn't come off, of course. Let's leave that. Let's leave the door open to the pencil-like thrust. Come on.
Yeah, no, I agree. But once... Yeah, absolutely. But once that situation has arisen... That's the way to go.
Yeah. Well, we started the show in the steaming jungles of Burma, or Myanmar as it's now known, and we ended up talking about the Rhine in a chilly corner of Chiswick. You get some serious air miles listening to this show. That's all we've got time for today. Remember, we're twice weekly this month. I hope it's not playing havoc with your schedules.
Yep, keep in touch, everyone. All regular comm systems are fully operational. Twitter, #WeHaveWays. And of course,
the ancient.
For the old and the very young, you can use the email wehavewayspodcast@gmail.com. See you all soon. Cheerio.
Ta-ra.